Salve omnes to realhomerecording.com. I'm Adam. This will be the third and final video of the Old School Philosophy in the Box series. And of course, the last part is mastering. Music mastering is sometimes tough to define. The way I describe it is it's the final step in the audio production process prior to the physical products being made. Now, if you're making a file, that is the physical product, the ones and zeros. It's also the time when a fresh set of ears can enhance the mix and add the final polish and fixes to a song or album. Someone else hearing mixes for the first time and taking a crack at them is important. To me, mastering is about making mixes sound the best they can on the largest variety of speaker systems out there. The higher the quality, the more immersive the music experience can be. For the semantic people out there, and I know who you are, I'm looking right at you, I'm pointing at you. Technically, this video is about pre-mastering. The commonly used term is mastering, so let's not harp on that any further. And if you really want to get into semantics, mastering engineers used to be called transfer engineers. So let's not go there. A few things that a mastering engineer may do includes equalization to balance frequencies across an entire album, compression, including limiting, noise reduction, song sequencing, volume matching, checking mono compatibility, the creation of DDP files for compact disc manufacturing, as well as creating master variations for MP3s, AAC files, and high-resolution lossless files, as well as archiving everything. And the list goes on. Some mastering engineers may also put songs onto tape. There are also a lot of other aspects of mastering that I won't cover in this video. I highly recommend Bobcat's mastering book, that's K-A-T-Z, his mastering book. It goes into depth on this subject, as well as audio mastering techniques that can be found on lynda.com, that's lynda.com. Just like how I stress the importance of high quality monitoring, aka speakers, during the recording and mixing process, I will stress my feeling on getting your music mastered by a person with a good set of second ears. Just like getting a second opinion from a doctor about a serious health concern, having another person hear your music and put their touch on it is a nice thing to have. Now, I understand a mastering engineer may not be in your budget. I have worked on a number of projects where I've mastered it, didn't want to, but had to. It happens all the time. Mastering engineers really are a luxury. Let's get that straight. So if you're doing everything yourself, that's okay. I wouldn't recommend it, and I would be wrong to say that you should master your own music, but it comes down to money. So if that's what must be done, then that's all that can be done. And there's really no need to continue to harp on it. So with that being said, let's get started. One way that I might handle mastering is to mix everything at my home studio, which I call Studio A. Then I'll take the tracks to Studio B, which has a nicer set of speakers, is also in a different room, and really it has just a nicer setup for critical monitoring. If you don't have another place to master your mixes at, then I would just recommend maybe moving to a different room, using different speakers if you have any, borrowing from somebody, something that will let you hear your mixes differently. Again, though, I do recommend using the IK Multimedia ARC plugin. This is something that I should have talked about in the mixing and recording videos, but I'll say it now. Pan laws. In the videos, if you're using the SSL emulation, the Brit 4K console emulation with the Slate VCC plugin, the pan law should be set to -4.5 and -3 if you're using either the Neve or the API consoles, and really -3 decibels in general will get you a nice mix. -3 is kind of a standard, and it's what I usually use, period. Pan laws affect perceived loudness while panning tracks from one channel to the other. And I'll get into pan laws in depth in another video, but for now, don't worry about it. Just set it to -3 and you should be good. All right, now let's look at some of the plugins that I would recommend for mastering purposes. Before anybody asks why I have so many plugins in this chain, this isn't the amount that I would normally use. I'm just showing you guys a large variety of options. If you want to see how I would normally master songs, go check out the Acoustica Magenta EQ review video where I did do some mastering, and you'll see I only have like 5 plugins on the chain. Okay, so this file represents our virtual mixdown tape. If you recall from the old school mixing video, the last plugin on the master channel was Slate virtual tape machines set to the 1/2" machine at a 15 inches per second tape speed. So we're going to bring that tape into our mastering console, and the most transparent console channel with the Slate virtual console collection is the Brit 4K setting. I don't know why, it just is. And that's not in the marketing material, that's based on independent testing, and the Brit 4K channels plugin is the most transparent out of the 5. Now let's move on to equalizers and compressors. In the old days, mastering studios had exclusive access to really high-end gear. They have very precise equipment that costs a fortune. These days, we have very close approximations in the box available to use, which is freaking awesome. Case in point, 2 plugins that I reviewed on this channel cost $5,000 and between $10,000 to $15,000 for their hardware equivalents, those being the Manley Massive Passive Equalizer and the Sontec 432C Mastering Equalizer. So right there, you're going to spend between $15,000 to $20,000 on 2 equalizers. I don't know about you, but I can't afford that. But we have plugins that approximate their sound, which is awesome. For me, transparency is the name of the game with compressors and equalizers when it comes to mastering. These processors should not affect the mix balance to a great extent. Minimal is best. A plugin called The Glue is a clean spin-off of the classic SSL bus compressor. The TDR feedback compressor has a really transparent sound, as well as the Slate FGX's FG Comp processor. If you're going to use the FGX, be sure to turn off the FG level portion of the plugin so it doesn't affect the signal and to save on CPU usage. Mastering compressor ratios are set to no higher than 3:1. Oftentimes they are set to 1.5 and only 3 decibels maximum of gain reduction is set when you use the threshold control. One trick for transparent compression is to perform parallel compression on the mix. Yeah, you heard that right. Just like how you may do this on a drum bus or a vocal bus, you can use it on your entire mix for transparent compression. Now, in order to do this, you take a compressor plug-in, you apply a good amount of gain reduction, I mean to the point where it sounds bad, and then you use the mix knob to bring it under the uncompressed mix. A lot of times you'll use like 10% or 20%, maybe less. It all depends on the blend, but you bring it under your uncompressed mix so you hear it, but it doesn't sound terrible. Parallel compression is also known as the New York compression trick. If you don't have a mix knob in your DAW or plugin, then you could set up a send or duplicate the mix track and do it there. This is kind of an in-depth trick, so I'm going to make a video about this in the near future to demonstrate this technique better. Now on to the equalizers. The Master EQ 432 from IK Multimedia excels at transparency, as well as equalizers that are set to linear phase mode, like the Redline EQ. You can also use FabFilter's Pro Q2 if you have that. Again, all set to linear phase mode. Magenta EQ is great for adding some character if it's necessary on mixes, especially in the mid-range. This plugin sounds really good with mids. But as with most mastering equalizers, a little cut here and a little boost there goes a long way. If you're adding or subtracting any more than a couple decibels, then you really should consider getting your track remixed. Are all these plugin emulations the exact same quality as the hardware? I couldn't tell you for sure. What I can tell you is that they sound great and they improve mixes. Next up, we have de-essing. I like to use FabFilter's Pro DS. I think it's transparent, it sounds great, it does what de-essing needs to do. If you don't know what de-essing is, basically it's a process that eliminates harshness from tracks. Inevitably, you will run into mixes that are just too harsh, and a harsh sounding master is a bad master. You don't want to hurt your listeners' ears. De-essing is basically frequency-specific compression. Now, the only problem I have with de-essing is that it too can affect the other frequencies in a mix. So now would be a good time to talk about mix stems. One thing that is done at the professional level, thanks to digital mastering, is mix stems. Basically what you do is instead of having only your whole mix to work with during mastering, you split your mix into a group of tracks known as stems. To keep things simple, I usually just have a vocal stem, which consists of the lead and background vocals, along with a bass stem, which is either the bass guitar or a bass synth. And then finally you have an instrumental stem, which is everything except for the vocals and bass. You create all these stems at mixdown time. Now, why do all this? The reason is the bass level and the vocal level are always in contention during mastering. If you master something, the normal complaint is, I can't hear the bass, the vocals are too low, the vocals are too high. Well, if you have those tracks available individually, it's very easy to lower them. It's also easier to de-ess a vocal by itself, or to add some high end to the instrumental track without affecting the vocals, or to add some low end to a bass track without affecting the kick drum, and vice versa. Apologies for the dogs barking in the background. I'm dog sitting and the dogs just will not shut up, and I'm not gonna get finished this voiceover if I don't continue now, and maybe they'll be quiet in a few seconds. Okay, so back to the plugins. We have spatial processors next in the chain, stereo imagers, widening equalizers, and reverb. Now these aren't always necessary, and if you go overboard you may end up in trouble, but if a mix is lacking that something special that makes the mix deeper, the master deeper really, these type of plugins will come in handy. Now I already did a video about reverb glue, and I think I mentioned it there, but I'll mention it again. When it comes to reverb, I prefer something transparent, just like I prefer EQ and compressors to be transparent, and Exponential Audio's Phoenix Verb gives that to me. So I do recommend that. And AOM Stereo Imager sounds fantastic. It gets a lot of praise on the audio forums, and I recommend trying that out. It's also pretty cheap if you run it for a year, or even if you buy it outright, it's not that expensive. Oh my God. I should use these dog barks for sound effects. Continuing our old school approach, we're going to put one last mix bus console plugin here, and this time I'm going to either set it to the Brit-N or the USA console setting. These are the cleanest out of the 5 console emulations in Slate VCC. Now the next setting is optional, and really the Slate VCC is also optional, but if you want one last round of tape, I say go for it. Music used to be laid back to tape. Music masters used to be laid back to tape. So set VTM to the half-inch machine, FG456, which simulates Ampex 456 tape, and the 15 inches per second tape speed for that old school vibe. If you're going for transparency, but you still want that tape sound, you can set the tape type to FG9 and set the tape speed to 30 inches per second. You can set the input levels to taste. If you don't want too much saturation, don't go above 0 VU. Finally, let's talk about everybody's favorite, limiters, the processors that make things louder. A lot of people, they think mastering is just making things louder, and that's not the case, but limiters are definitely important, and there are two varieties of limiters that I'm going to talk about, single band and multi-band. Multi-band limiters allow for more control over frequencies. A single band limiter is a lot like a volume knob in that it affects the entire mix. A multi-band limiter is a lot like an equalizer in that it processes portions of frequency bands and leaves other ones untouched. And that gives us a lot more control over limiting, and a lot of times it leads to louder mixes. That's like kind of the secret with mastering engineers. They use their multi-band limiters to great effect. I will say that both types are useful during mastering. If I'm being honest, multi-band limiting isn't something I've really done much of, and I do look forward to exploring the process in a future in-depth video. Alright, now back to the single band limiters, and actually talking specifically about brick wall limiting. Brick wall limiters, like what we have in the box these days, didn't even exist a few years ago. They got their name because you set it so that once a signal hits a defined level, it cannot go past that point. The signal hits a virtual brick wall. And digital brick wall limiters, like the ones we have in the box, have a feature called look ahead, which allows them to perform better than what you can get out of the box. Analog limiters have no look ahead function, and therefore they don't really do as good of a job as the ones in the box. A limiter's job is to control peaks, and that in effect makes the mix louder because we're able to bring the volume up and not go past that limit. Brick wall limiters have improved tremendously over the years so that you can now get louder masters that don't negatively affect the perceived dynamics of music. And that's why a lot of mainstream music is loud, but it doesn't sound as bad as it used to a few years ago. Mainly what's going on is the transient preservation has improved, but overuse of limiting, also known as hypercompression, still has its negative side effects, such as bringing up detail that was hidden during the mix, which is often just noise that clutters up the way a song sounds, and that takes away a song's depth and spatiality, which I think is really important, that is preserved in recorded music. And as soon as you start limiting the shit out of your masters, it just clutters up the song, and everything starts sounding flat. And even though transients sound better, transients being like the snare drum and the kick drum, it's still that just cluttering up the sound with that noise that used to be lower in level just doesn't sound good. The other thing we have is meters out the butt these days. In the box, you can have all the meters you want, and these meters used to cost a ton of money. We have them in the box, and actually we have one that is, I think it's free, or it comes free if you buy any T-Rax plugins. Anyway, let me get to them. The essential meters are spectrum analyzers, also known as real-time analyzers or RTAs. And we also have loudness /RMS /true peak meters, and phase correlation, phase scope to check mono compatibility. Like I said, the IK T-Rax meter is really nice, and I think it's free. And it pretty much shows you everything you need for mastering. I really like the perceived loudness meter, and you couple that with the loudness suggestion, and it makes it really easy to use. And the way that works is you find the loudest passage of your song, and you just set it so that it's within the green. You can go a little bit in the red, but I wouldn't recommend it. Keep it in the green, and you'll be good to go. By the way, the peak meter in this is sample accurate, which is really important to have when mastering. I want to reiterate that if you can afford it, I would suggest hiring a mastering engineer for your music projects. Real mastering studios do have most home studio engineers beat in two categories. Number one, their listening environments are stellar. Their speakers cost more than some recording studios. I would say most home studios. And the really good mastering engineers are doing this day in, day out. They know what good music sounds like, and their experience level smashes that of the lowly home studio engineer, myself included. I mean, seriously, you should see some of these mastering quality speakers. They're through the roof, and then they have their room set up in a great way. And actually, one thing that stuck out for me when it came to mastering was positioning speakers a ways back. A lot of times when you're mixing, you might have near field speakers really close to you. But for mastering, what they'll do is they'll put speakers farther away. You know, if you have a home theater system, it's kind of set up like that. And the challenge is sticking your computer monitor in front of you so that it doesn't block the frequencies from hitting you properly. And this is where having a tablet, like an iPad, or I don't even know what they're called. All I know is the iPad, the Windows something, HP something or other. Anyway, having a tablet and an app like Nyrink V Control Pro comes in handy so that you can have no obstructions in front of you. Just that in your lap. But again, it comes down to budget. What we like to have is different than what we can afford. And finally, I'm going to leave you guys with some random tips. DAW mixes can be enhanced better than mixes that are too bright. So if you're going to err on one side, err on the DAW side. That includes the vocals. Leave your mixes very dynamic. Volume matching should be accomplished during mastering. Use the Magic AB plugin to compare album tracks as well as music in the same genre. Now you can AB a reference mix or master for free, but Magic AB really comes in handy. It's easy to use and it helps out a lot to keep your ears fresh. The other plugin I like to use is the Blue Cat Freak Analyst with the difference mode so that you can see frequency matches between songs. I went into detail about how that's done with the Freak Analyst video, which I'll link to in the video description, so check that out. You may discover that some of your songs will have to be remixed. It happens all the time. Don't worry about it. You didn't fail because you have to go back and remix. It's just that you got to go back and remix. It happens all the time. Listen at 2 levels and only 2 levels. Listen loud so that you can hear the low end and the harsh frequencies, and also listen quieter so that you can gauge frequency levels and just balance levels in general a lot easier. You should also do this while you're mixing as well. Use at least 2 different pairs of monitors, 1 large pair and 1 small pair. And if you do rap music or pop music, dance music, buy a really big pair, like a PA system that a DJ would use at a club or something like that, if you can spare the expense. One trick that I like to do is using my lowest common denominator music bullet speaker to check how the master translates on a really crappy speaker. Another thing that mastering engineers like to have is 2 subwoofers. They say 1 is not enough. You got to have 2. Again, it comes down to money. And again, this is discussed at length in the Bob Katz mastering book. Another set of speakers that people don't really normally call them speakers, but they're basically speakers that you put over or close to your ears. Headphones. They're nice to check master. Here we go with the dogs again. Headphones are useful to check masters on, but don't use them as your main playback source. Again, IK Multimedia ARC comes into play during mastering. I cannot recommend this plugin enough. Okay, so after all your mastering's done, after you disable ARC because you know you got to disable that plugin, otherwise your master will sound terrible to everybody else, it's time to render your track and I would render it at the highest quality you can. You can either do 32-bit floating point at 96 kilohertz if that's what you were mastering at the whole time. If not, do it at your sample rate. If you're doing 441, do 441. Regardless, keep it at the native sample rate of your mixdown file, and keep it at 32-bit floating point or 64-bit if you're an absolute nutcase, which sometimes I am, and render that out. Bring that into Voxengo Rate Brain. If you want to buy the Pro version, it does have this cool minimum phase mode, which simulates taking your track, sending it out of a digital to analog converter, and then into an analog to digital converter, so it doesn't have any ringing side effects. Which, by the way, I don't really hear any ringing side effects, so I think the free version is perfectly capable of delivering high quality sample rate conversion. So we're going to take our file, load it into Voxengo, and then we're going to set it to either 64-bit floating point or 32-bit floating point, and then to our final sampling rate, which will either be 44.1 or 48 kilohertz in most cases. I recommend 48 as the ideal sample rate. And then what we'll do once Rate Brain has done its thing is load this back into Reaper, into its batch converter. We're going to put Ozone 5 on the FX chain. And the reason we're doing this is because when you do sample rate conversion, it will actually add to frequencies a lot of times. So it'll go over your limiter setting. So again, we're going to bring it into the batch converter, put Ozone 5, set that to negative 0.3 if we're doing a either lossless compression file or we're doing a CD master. Negative 0.3 is what I like to do. If you want to, you can set this intersample rate protector on. And then we're going to set our dither to mbit plus, normal, noise shaping to normal, and we'll be good to go. Now, if you're going to convert to MP3, disable dither and put the limiter to -1 decibels full scale. So that's it, guys. I will make some more videos about this that are a bit more in depth, but for now, that's a ton of information for you guys to digest and think over and incorporate into your next DIY mastering session. This has been Adam for RealHomeRecording.com. Ciao.